Parents who are already faced with the rising cost of living could soon be seeing higher childcare costs as nurseries struggle to cope with their own surging bills.
In fact, 2 surveys had found that around 4 in 10 of the 27,000 women who chose to take part were thinking of leaving their jobs because of the soaring cost of childcare. Of course, it affects fathers as well, all parents and carers. Zoe Conway has more.
Oh, whoa, look at that!
Charlie and Arlo are cooking up something very tasty at the Madcaps nursery in Market Deeping in Lincolnshire. The government funds children to be here for either 15 or 30 hours a week. The nursery says it works out at £4.50 per child per hour.
That money doesn't go up percentage-wise in relation to anything to do with inflation or anything. We're expected to pay wages, which have gone up, and the two don't marry at all. So for a nursery like ours, where we're generally looking after funded children, we're always running at a loss. So we're looking at ways to cut costs, and I'm afraid the biggest cost is staff wages, so that's very difficult.
In a survey for the Early Years Alliance, which represents preschool settings, nearly 1 in 3 of the providers who took part said they're running at a loss, and a majority said they'd be increasing their fees. But they don't want to do that here. Instead, Sue has decided not to pay herself a salary.
I can't pay the staff otherwise, and it seems the fairest thing to do.
That's pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
I love my job. I love the children. So there you go.
Because if you were paying yourself, what would the state of your finances be?
Impossible.
Well done, clever boy.
Tiffany Hurry gave up her job in a nursery to look after her baby. Now that Kieran is 1 year old, she'd love to go back part-time, but she can't afford to because there's no funding for children under the age of 2.
Our childcare costs would be ridiculous. We wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't be able to earn any money if I was to go back to work doing the job that I love. It would mean that I would be going back basically for free. I would be going back and not earning a wage. It would all be going on childcare. I think it's awful that we have to wait until they're 2 to get 15 hours. And even then, 15 hours isn't quite enough for some people.
So, for now, she's had to give up the job she loves and is working in the evenings as a cleaner.
There might well be people watching who think, you decided to have 3 children. There's a kind of price that goes along with that.
Yeah.
Sacrifices are going to have to be made. Suck it up.
Most people that I know have changed. They've gone to part-time hours, or they've changed their working routine to fit the children's school hours. So I think we already change a lot. I don't think that we should have to change our profession as well.
Tiffany's experience is far from unique, according to the campaign group Pregnant Then Screwed and Mumsnet. They found that of the nearly 27,000 mothers who volunteered to take part in their survey, 40% work fewer hours than they would like because of childcare costs, while 43% have considered leaving their job because of the cost of childcare. Some children's development has slowed as a result of a lack of socialisation during the pandemic lockdowns. Jasmine's daughter is one of those affected, and Jasmine thinks her daughter would benefit from being full-time at the nursery.
If I could go back to work and I know could get affordable childcare, then I would go back to work, but we would be worse off her doing full-time because I can't afford it. I want my children to be proud and to be able to look up to their mum because I'm doing something with my life and I feel like I'm not doing that.
The survey by Pregnant Then Screwed and Mumsnet found that of the mothers who took part, 62% said the cost of their childcare was equal to or more than their rent or mortgage.
A lot of people would be better off working because we don't all want to be having money from the government and everything else. We do want to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and provide what we can for our children and our family.
Campaigners say that access to affordable childcare isn't just a women's issue. It's an economic one, because they say families don't work without childcare. Zoe Conway, BBC News.
Let's talk to the Conservative MP Siobhan Bailey. She's part of the Work and Pensions Committee and she leads on the cost of childcare. Siobhan, good morning to you. Thank you very much for talking to us. Lots of viewers have been in touch about this morning. If I just read Laura's email to you. She says she's got 2 small children. She and her husband work full-time, and with the free hours they get from the government, they still pay £1,350 a month, which is more than many people earn. At what point, she says, will the government recognise that economically it makes sense to fund better childcare? It'll reduce the gender gap, more people will be in work, reducing the skills shortage, creating better role models for our future. Just respond to Laura's point.
Oh, I mean, Laura is not alone. This is a massive issue, and I'm really grateful to you for covering it, and to the campaigners and the survey that's been done. It's a huge sample. I mean, we hit all of us as MPs here these issues in our post bags. It's not right to say the government is doing nothing. There is the offers, the 15 hours, the 30 hours, but there's quite a few issues with the system. I mean, there is issues with the system in terms of the private childcare element, the universal credit childcare element, and in terms of the government offer as well. And then more widely to that, there's problems, as some of Zoe's clips showed. You know, childcare providers are under incredible pressure, and a lot of the staff, they're early years educators, but they feel really undervalued and they're often underpaid. So it is a system that needs a lot of attention, and I've been raising this in Parliament quite a lot since I've been elected.
You've been elected for a couple of years. The Conservative government has been in office for 12 years, albeit part of it was in a coalition with the Lib Dems. But if the system is such a mess as you've characterised, that lays fairly and squarely at your government's door, doesn't it?
Well, listen, there's across a range of different governments, they've not quite got this right. Labour Party.
But you've had 12 years to fix it.
Oh no! Listen, I am here trying to find solutions. So absolutely, and I am one of the biggest thorns in the government side for that. But this is a systemic problem. We've kind of tried to fix things and tried to come up with offers which are actually quite generous. So, on the universal credit, the system will pay 85% of the childcare, but then there's a cap. So there's always these things that need tweaking. So what I've been looking at, and I'm looking at on the select committee, is what are the sort of short, medium and long-term changes that we can make to the universal credit system. And I'm also looking at the think tank called Onward. What are the short-term and then more radical changes that we can make to the system? I mean, I do applaud the campaigners, and I've spoken to on this issue, as they know. I don't agree with what they're saying about trying to have a big kind of inquiry into the system, because we do need changes now. And I think what your Laura, who's just spoken, and the early years providers are experiencing now is because of the cost of living squeeze and the energy costs. It's actually acute. We have to find some changes now and then look more separately at the wider issues. So I'm pregnant. I get quite breathless. So sorry if I get. Sounds like I'm really excited. I am excited to talk to you.
Well, you'll be in this situation then, in due course, all being well. Yep. So, I mean, how do you feel as a new mum about to go into the issue of childcare? I mean, do you even know? I mean, I know you understand it, I'm sure you do, but it's spectacularly complicated.
Oh yeah, no. Listen, I've got a little one as well, and we have the most weird and wonderful juggle, as lots of parents do, and MPs work really long and very strange hours. So the muddle of my week to make sure that I can go to work, and then the cost on top of that, it is pretty acute actually. And I'm not seeking sympathy. Nobody wants to give an MP sympathy, but this is across all demographics actually, and we are losing talent in the system. But what I don't agree with is that there's nothing being done. And what I do think is that if we all work together, we can create some changes.
So what would you, you say that it's not fair to blame the government. Many people will say, well, if it is in a mess, which clearly it is, the government you haven't been there, but it has been in post for 12 years. What can you do to try and sort this out quickly for many of the families who are struggling, for these parents who nearly 2/3 pay more on childcare than they do on their rent or their mortgage?
Well, listen, on the universal credit element, one of the biggest pressures on the families, often single parents as well, is the fact that we've got upfront payments for childcare. So mums and dads are having to find £1,000, over £1,000 at the beginning of each term. It's almost impossible. They have to borrow the money, and then the money comes back in sort of very strange amounts of payments, so they can never repay and they end up in debt. So that's something they're looking at. The cap, which is more problematic problematic in big cities, and particularly in London, on the childcare. So it's 85% of childcare costs, but it is capped at about £600 per month. That needs to be changed as far as I'm concerned. I can't preempt what the committee is going to do. That's a group of us. But in my view, we need to look, because they're still at 2005 rates. On the kind of wider childcare issue and private providers, I think we need to look at the childcare ratios. I think that this was looked at before and then put to one side. But I think we have to look at other countries, how they're providing childcare safely, but in a much cheaper form.
So more children for each carer, you mean?
Yeah, and actually, when I talk to my local childminders and my local providers here in Stroud, they are experts. I literally could not look after my little one all day. I take my hat off to all of them. So let's have a look at those ratios and let's see if we can bring the cost down. Because ultimately, some of the campaigners I've spoken to want the government, want the taxpayer to have completely free childcare. It's not affordable, and I don't think that's the right approach. But we can make changes.
Siobhan, just a final point on universal credit, which you've mentioned a couple of times. The Chancellor was criticised after the spring statement for not really doing enough. Is the government now going to go back and look at giving some kind of an inflation increase on universal credit?
Well, listen, we're looking at these types of issues on the Select Committee. We all know that the spring statement is not a big budget event, and we are working in very changeable times. So the Chancellor, I've spoken to the Chancellor about childcare, for example. I've spoken to the Department for Education, Secretary of State Nadeem about childcare. They all really care about this, and they really care about trying to find those measures and solutions. But there is no big bang measures that can immediately fix all the problems, particularly when we're in this kind of constantly moving inflationary pressure. So, the statements and the arrangements and the proposals made this week on the spring statement are in place, but then we've got to constantly look, and that's exactly what the Treasury are doing.
Siobhan Bailey, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you.